Hi everybody, this is Alexandra Lantz, and this is my final project on the Diane Ravitch lecture analysis. So the view I will be taking for this analysis is liberal, and I will say I've always considered myself a conservative and a Republican, but after this course I've noticed that a lot of my views on education actually align with that of a liberal. So that was the view I chose to take for this lecture. And just a little background on what liberals typically believe about education. They believe that poverty is the result of social conditions and that government programs can eliminate poverty. They are typically against charter schools and the voucher system and believe that public education is essential to compete in economic systems. They often push for preschool programs. They put more emphasis on providing equal education through government-financed programs. And liberals fight for poor and disadvantaged communities that require additional help to ensure they receive a fair education. So most of those points came from the Spring Book. And before we really start the analysis, I just wanted to look at the political views on education that Diane Ravitch has. And on the Ballotpedia article, it said that Diane Ravitch is considered independent, and her political views on education have really evolved over time. When working for President George Bush, Ravitch supported No Child Left Behind, and she also supported educational testing, school choice, and charter schools. However, over the past few years, she really has changed her political views on education. She now believes that standardized tests should be de-emphasized and used for diagnostics only. There should be local control of schools. She does not believe the Common Core is the best approach, and she thinks charter schools are not effective and are harmful to public schools. So she really did a 180 on her views throughout the years. So now we'll analyze Diane Ravitch's lecture given at Penn State Harrisburg, and we'll look at 4 key policy issues and analyze them through a liberal-focused lens. The first policy issue I'm going to talk about is about school choice. So that in this section, I'm going to talk about school choice, privatization, and the voucher system and charter schools. So that's all going to be kind of under this umbrella. So Ravitch once supported school choice, and it's clear from her lecture that she is really against school choice, the voucher system, privatization now, which is completely opposite of what she used to believe when she worked under George Bush. And she's very supportive of public schools. So Ravitch claims that thanks to the voucher system, charter schools take necessary funds away from public education, and public schools have been severely underfunded because of this privatization. The voucher system has caused a drop of students in public schools and a strain on the public school budget. Public schools arguably need more funding as private schools are able to pick and choose the students they accept. So I have a little more about that on the next page. There is no proof that charter schools score better than public schools, even though charter schools have the choice to choose their own students, essentially. This means that students with special needs, problem behaviors, or English language learners are often excluded. So, like I said on the last page, that last point I had about that funding being taken away from public schools, well, if public schools are serving those special needs, problem behaviors, or English language learners, then arguably they would need more funds to give them an equal education. So to take that money away from them and put it into a school really does seem unequal. So Ravitch also claimed that school choice actually enhances inequality and promotes segregation by race, religion, and gender, just to name a few. And one of the ways that happens is because charter schools can pretty much choose to exclude students. So, to bring this into the liberal lens, liberals support multiculturalism and education and also support bilingual education. This is to broaden students' knowledge of other countries, which would then lead to a richer and more understanding education. But it is very hard to do this if schools are segregated by race or culture in a charter school. So, I can definitely see that being one reason why liberals are often against charter schools. The next point I'm going to talk about is standardized tests. So Ravitch used to believe that national standards and standardized tests were necessary, and while she still believes that testing is necessary, she knows that how we use those tests or those results must change. She believes standardized tests should not be used to hold students, teachers, and schools accountable. If you use standardized tests to gauge teacher and school performance, you're just judging how lucky teachers got with their class roster, as some classes are just more challenging than others. Standardized tests should be used for diagnostics. They can help rule out underlying learning disabilities that a student might have. So she really says we do need some form of a test, but we don't need to use them for accountability. Ravitch also argues that test scores and standards do not make children learn. Instead, the curricula should have an emphasis on creativity, critical thinking, history, and literature. So it sounds to me like Ravitch believes that schools should be considered a social center, which really reminded me of the John Dewey article we read in the beginning of this course. So according to John Dewey, the purpose of public schools should be to keep individuals adjusted to their rapidly changing environment. Schools should provide a means to bringing people and beliefs together. Students should be mixed together under wholesome influences. So Ravitch is really arguing to move schools in the direction of preparing students to live in a democratic society, which is what John Dewey had also touched on. The third point I want to talk about, the third policy issue, is control. So when it comes to control of schools, Ravitch really argues that local voices matter. Although public schooling may need a mix of federal, state, and local influence, Ravitch makes one point clear. The Billionaire Boys Club, as she refers to it, should stay out of education. Ravitch states that the fake reform movement is supported by billionaires who only want to try out experiments on students. And she also argues that it's about power and control and not about children. Although Ravitch once worked under President Bush, Ravitch makes her disdain about the federal government clear when she states that the federal government only supports testing because it sets up low test scores, forces schools to close, and further promotes privatization. And as we know from before, Ravitch is very against privatization of schools. Ravitch is also against policymakers who have never set foot in a classroom, yet sit around and decide what teachers should do, all while making more money than a teacher ever will. However, the point I wanted to bring up through the liberal lens is that liberals often believe that government-financed programs will help close the achievement gap in school. So how does that relate to the control of school? Well, the federal government offers little input to what goes into schools, but is able to offer funds. These funds come with strings attached. Although Ravitch pushed for local control of schools, some federal control will have to be involved if schools are going to take federal funds. As Spring stated in Chapter 3, the federal government will not hand out money and trust schools will use it appropriately on their own. The government will have to be involved. But I do agree with Ravitch, and I do think local should have the most control and the most say. And like she said, local voices do matter. The last point I want to bring up is a very broad point, and it's the war on poverty. And after listening to Diane Ravitch's lecture, I kind of realized that this was the most important one. So even though it is a pretty broad category, we'll go into some smaller points within this. So in most cases, the liberal view on poverty is that it is the direct result of social conditions. So in line with this view, Ravitch stated that student test scores are more affected by a child's parents than their own teachers. A child's education is greatly impacted by several factors, including parental involvement, family income, and nutrition. Ravitch also made a profound statement towards the end of her lecture. She said, "The most important thing you can do to improve education is to improve the lives of children." And as a first grade teacher in a public school, that quote really did stick out to me. Students are only encouraged to learn when they are well fed, well looked after, and have proper health care. I don't know why that says hair care. Health care. So, in conclusion of everything, although her political views have changed over time, Diane Ravitch is currently most aligned with a liberal point of view when it comes to public education. She offered many important points in her lecture about school choice, standardized test, control, and how to end the war on poverty, just to name a few. And I'll say my biggest takeaway from listening to Diane Ravitch's lecture was, if you want to improve education and close the achievement gap, you must improve the lives of children first. You cannot improve the lives of children through things like school choice or standardized testing. The achievement gap begins outside of the classroom and will only end if we look at solutions outside of our public schools. And this is a list of my references. So thank you very much for listening. I took a lot of great takeaways from the lecture. So thank you.